On July the 11th, IPBES released a new assessment report that focuses on the diverse values and valuation of nature. It's the outcome of a 4-year work involving 82 experts from all around the world, and it's intended to inform mainly society and decision makers on how to address the current biodiversity crisis and to change the current development model in a more just and sustainable way. And we discuss today on ILBO Live the main findings of this new report with Barbara Muraca and Dominic Lenzi. Barbara Muraca is professor at the University of Oregon in the USA and lead author at the IPBES Values Assessment. And Dominic Lenzi is assistant professor at the University of Twente and fellow in the same report. Welcome, both of you, and thank you for being here today. So, Professor Lenzi, I think we can directly dive into the more theoretical part of the report. And I would ask you to give us a brief outlook of the typology of the values and of the different methods of valuation of nature. And I would also ask how values and decision-making influence each other, what you found in this report, and how they can be integrated in a comprehensive evaluation effort by politics and institutions.
Three very big questions, and I think I'll need some help. So Barbara is going to have to jump in when I forget something. But if we start with the typology, basically what we were asked to do was to come up with a new way of understanding the diverse values of nature, and really to build on what IPBES was already doing with respect to values, which is to go beyond the ecosystem services debate and what we already had in the Millennium Assessment, and to really provide a comprehensive view on environmental values. So what we've done here is to provide a new typology of nature's values, and this is quite theoretical. Actually, it has different levels, but overall, what it's trying to do, if I can say very briefly, what it's trying to do is to give policymakers, evaluation experts, and also scientists a way to look at more general ways of relating to and responding to nature, and more specific ways that make sense in a particular context or in relation to a particular kind of object or ecosystem or something of the sort. And nothing like this has been done before. So this is really a transdisciplinary effort. It's bringing together expertise from economics, environmental psychology, humanities, environmental ethics, studies of institutions, and a lot of different elements have gone into this typology. But we believe that actually this is a big step forward. So this is bringing together a lot of different discourses that haven't really been brought together before, and giving them a platform in policy evaluation that they have not had before. There are some very nice figures in the SPM, and basically the story that these tell you about different valuation methods is that there is not one integrated approach. There isn't one golden method or perfect approach that's going to do everything you want. So any valuation method that's adopted implies certain choices that the valuation practitioner or the decision maker is interested in. So what you get is certain focus on particular values, but not others. So the involvement of particular interests and not others. And it's important to be aware of these sorts of advantages and disadvantages when looking at valuation methods and approaches. So there isn't any neutral stance here. And what we've done now in the values assessment is to really systematically examine which values are related to which methods and which are not. And what are the kind of advantages and disadvantages of taking up any of these approaches.
One important point is to add about the transdisciplinarity of the process itself is that something that characterizes IPBES is a strong attention given to other systems of knowledge, or what under IPBES is called indigenous and local knowledge. So the interesting part of what you were saying, Dominic, just as a small addition, is that in the value typology, we did not only consider also other knowledge and value systems, but we also had authors participating in the designing of that typology who are rooted in different value and knowledge systems, either because they are themselves representative of indigenous communities or local communities, or because they have been studying and working and collaborating for several years with them. So I think this is important about the transdisciplinarity of the process. And the process of the assessment itself goes out to review to partners, including representative of indigenous and local communities. So this is also a very strong novelty of this process, that went out and collected feedback and in different reiterative processes, which I'm not going into details here now. I think this is an important point. What we know is that so far only 5% of published valuation studies report uptake of diverse values of nature in policy decisions. The good news is that there are methods of valuation that can mirror the diversity and plurality of values. They are not yet taken on in policy for various reasons, and as Dominic has said, some of the reasons are related also to lack of resources, not only financial, but also time, for example. But the report offers clear indication also about which methods might be more appropriate under which conditions.
And another question that I would direct to Barbara Muraca is more about the pragmatic part of the report, with this wide basis of definitions and theory about what are values and how we should use valuation methods. We are trying to give policymakers some tools to be more inclusive. And once again, I think this emphasizes the fact that the biophysical part, the social part are not divided, and the economic part also, obviously. So maybe this is a naive question, but what are, if you would have to choose some of the key messages, what are the guidelines that you would stress to achieve that transformative change to policymakers, maybe in the short or medium term?
Some of the key findings are related to the importance of the diversity and the diverse values of nature, and the importance of giving a voice and focusing on diverse and multiple values of nature, particularly because as we have seen, there is an overemphasis on a narrow set of values, not even only on instrumental values, but on market-based instrumental values, which leaves out even a large number of so-called instrumental values in a way. And this is reductive and problematic because it tends to reiterate the problems. There are important findings also about how, for example, economic growth is one of the triggers of biodiversity and ecosystem services loss and depletion. And so one of the messages is that focusing only on a small set of values reiterates as part of the problem instead of being part of the solution. In chapter 5, different trajectories for transformative change are depicted. There is not one trajectory which is proposed, suggested, or recommended to policymakers, but it's shown that most of the trajectories that diverge from the kind of business as usual path focus on a diversity of values, and some of the trajectories or some of the so-called paths or pathways include, for example, the classical green economy pathway. Another pathway is the traditional nature conservation pathway, but there are interesting other pathways that are also articulated here, such as the so-called degrowth pathway, or the Earth Stewardship pathway, and there are even more pathways that come, for example, inspired from indigenous and local communities. One thing that I want to focus about key messages is a terminology that goes back to the global assessment, the importance of leverage points for transformation. It goes further deep. And so it starts from recognizing the multiple values of nature to meaningfully include the diverse values of nature and human nature relationship in decision-making via, for example, adopting methods that can capture that variety and plurality. To a deeper level, which is not just recognizing and capturing them using methods, but also designing institutions that embrace the diverse values of nature, all the way to mobilizing what Chapter 5 calls sustainability aligned values, which is a more deep interventions at the level of institutions. An institution is the general term that includes practices, norms, for example, then mobilize sustainability aligned values and shift development paradigms toward the protection of biodiversity, where biodiversity in the IPBES context never means only the biological dimension of it, but always includes also what, for example, elsewhere is called biocultural diversity. Because as we know, biodiversity cannot be disentangled from cultural and social practices that have been essential in maintaining, preserving, sustaining, and supporting biodiversity.
A last quick question is an opinion. I would like to get from both of you about maybe the most important next event on biodiversity will be the COP15 in Montreal, finally. And what do you think, what do you expect about the importance that this IPBES report will get in the CBD negotiations?
Well, it is always hard to anticipate what is going to happen. But I think this assessment, in many reasons, is unique. Not in the sense it is more important than others, but is unique in its approach because of the focus on values. We have a lot of knowledge about the biodiversity loss and the depletion of ecosystem services. There is a lot already out there, and there is even more coming from other IPBES assessments. And this is very important to know. But this has a slightly different focus because it focuses exactly on that, not on that coming together of the ecological processes with sociocultural and political processes. So the hope is that the key messages of this assessment will be taken seriously at the next various opportunities globally, not just the one you mentioned, but even further down the line. And in particular, I hope that the core message of the assessment, and which means that goes in the direction of saying that decisions that are based on a narrow set of market values of nature underpin the current global biodiversity crisis, as the warning message and the positive message that says that there are many opportunities out there to embed the diverse values of nature into decision making for navigating towards more just and sustainable futures. I hope that these two core messages of the assessment come through and are taken on and taken seriously by policymakers. But of course, I'm articulating a hope. Whether this will be the case or not, I don't know. The one important thing that I'm happy to see and that came out from the plenary is also a stronger attention to a collaboration, for example, between IPBES and IPCC, which I very much welcome. And I also very much welcome that within the IPCC, there seems to be a hopefully growing attention also to the soft science, if you wish, right? Not just the hard science, but also the attention to, for example, the dimension of practices of people as an important element of that. So I hope this is going to lead into a direction that might really help us go into deeper leverage points for radical change and transformation.
I think the most important thing to look for at the COP on the CBD is, as Barbara was saying, if this kind of message about economic growth and the use of nature for short-term profits, if this is actually brought into some kind of official communication of the CBD, the implication would be that countries' national biodiversity strategies would have to refer to this. So every country that's a member of the CBD has to propose periodic reports on what they're doing to improve the state of biodiversity in their countries. And so the adoption of this or similar messages has implications then for how countries report and plan for biodiversity management in their countries. So that would be one obvious way that the values assessment could have a big influence. Having said that, I mean, the problem with the CBD already has been no credible enforcement mechanism for country plans and country pledges. So as you know, the 2010 targets all failed none were achieved. This was a finding from IPBES already in the previous global assessment. And this is a huge problem because my impression is still that biodiversity is less important than climate mitigation for countries, and that climate mitigation itself is not that important for a lot of countries. So I see a really big political gap between what these scientific assessments propose and what policymakers actually do. And I think one thing we need to be careful about is a gap between rhetoric and policy. So it's easier for policymakers to agree with something without any implications for what they have to do. And this has happened before. So while it's a very good thing that these messages are going to be debated and perhaps adopted at the CBD, we also need to look at implementation and enforcement. It's not enough for policymakers to just sign a document and go home. This is absolutely not enough. And I am worried, given our current political context globally, that is a reasonable expectation, actually. So I think civil society, NGOs, many groups are going to need to keep pressure on policymakers to avoid that kind of response, that kind of outcome.